Growing up in the mid-2000s was an interesting time. It was the turn of the century where one could argue innovation and creativity were at their peak. And amidst this sea of change was the introduction of many different cartoons that Kid Icarus would spend many hours watching. From the grim adventures of Billy and Mandy, to the marvelous misadventures of Flapjack, to the original Teen Titans, not whatever the show has become now. There was one show that stood above all the rest, and to this day is something I can see myself rewatching even now that I'm in my late 20s. I can't imagine many people who grew up in this time period not having this intro seared into the back of their brains. Hearing this alone brings me back to a time when things were so much simpler, when the only responsibilities most of us had was keeping our rooms clean, and the only scheduling we had to do was making sure we knew when the next episode was airing. Before we go any further, let me just be clear about something. I love technology. The versatility, how it makes day-to-day life so much easier in so many ways, and how now with the introduction of many different types of streaming services, we can watch any show or movie, be it recent or classic, pretty much anytime we want to. I love all of that, and I don't think I want to go back to the way things used to be for the most part. But, and I'm sure many people would agree with me on this, there was a sense of accomplishment in waking up early for that next episode, or timing a bathroom break right when the commercial hits and making it back to the TV as soon as it was over. There were many shows that invoked that feeling in me, and I think this was the one that did it the most. You see, Avatar: The Last Airbender was more than just a cartoon. Or should I say, is more than just a cartoon. The reason I'm differentiating the two is because anybody can make that statement about anything they enjoy, especially if it's something you're nostalgic about from your childhood. But even though I do have very fond memories of this show as a kid, I'm making that statement through adult lenses, and I can wholeheartedly say that they don't make kid shows quite like this anymore. And unfortunately, it's possible that nothing quite like this will ever come again. And before you guys say it, yes, I'm well aware of the ongoing Avatar comics, which, by the way, I'm genuinely surprised how many of the Last Airbender fans don't know these exist. If you enjoyed the original show and want to see what happened after the final episode, give these a try. They're still ongoing and they answer a lot of questions leading up to the Legend of Korra, which, spoilers, I'm also aware of. I'll be making a separate Legend of Korra video in the future because despite all of the hate that it gets, which might be deserved, it's still canon to the universe. I think most of that hate is due to it being compared to the original show, which is fair. It is a sequel, so the comparison makes sense. But we'll get to that when we get to it. The story of The Last Airbender begins like most stories do, with a brother and a sister almost getting crushed to death by giant slabs of ice in the South Pole. It's here that their fateful meeting with the boy in the iceberg would change their lives forever. Throughout the course of Season 1, I've always enjoyed the dynamic between this trio, although as a kid, I never really put much thought into why I enjoyed their dynamic so much, just that I always did. Looking back at the show through adult eyes, I think I can try and make an assessment as to why this cast was so memorable. Of course, each member had their own unique quirks and shortcomings. Sokka was a non-bender, who made up for his inability to bend with his wit and tenacity. He was the comedic straight man, but ironically the most serious of the group. Being the last remaining warrior in his village, this would make sense. In a world where certain groups of people had basically what would be akin to superpowers through his eyes, he was very forward-thinking, tactical, and pragmatic. He saw things for what they were, and with the threat of an ongoing war, was slow to trust strangers. Katara, who was a novice waterbender, was somewhat the opposite of her brother. She was by nature a very optimistic and nurturing person. She always saw the good in people and was always willing to help anybody in need. She's courageous and would more often than not give anybody the benefit of the doubt until they gave her a reason not to. And then there's Aang, who, although shares certain traits with both of them, is more similar to Katara than Sokka, in that he's also very optimistic, good-natured, and willing to help anybody in need. But unlike Katara, he's a lot more jovial, lighthearted, and is able to see the potential fun in any situation. Individually, each cast member has their own very unique and memorable traits, but I think what made them such a memorable group was how they bounced off of each other and kept each other grounded. Sokka's down-to-earth pragmatism kept both Katara and Aang's optimism in check, reminding them that they're still in the middle of a war. Sometimes things will go their way, sometimes they won't. But they shouldn't be naive with any decisions that they make. Katara's optimism and hopefulness reminds the other two that even though things are tough, it's through helping each other that gets them through the toughest situations. What's the point of all the struggle if you don't believe there's a light at the end of the tunnel? And then there's Aang, whose childlike wonder and lightheartedness reminds the other two that it's not just about the destination, but the journey as well. Due to him being absent throughout most of the war, he hasn't been jaded like the rest of the world is, despite him being the key to saving it. Throughout the course of Season 1, Aang has to come face to face with all the events that have transpired during his 100-year hiatus. From the destruction of all of his people to the subjugation of the entire world by one nation, he has to face all of these issues head on, knowing that if he fails, it'll be the end of everything. All of this at the tender age of 12 years old. Looking back on Season 1, a majority of the journey is Aang getting reacquainted with the world. Because remember, it's been 100 years for everyone else, but for Aang, it felt brief, only maybe a couple of days. So putting yourself in his shoes, how would you feel when in the blink of an eye, everything you've known is changed, everyone you loved is gone, and the world either blames you for not preventing the current state of affairs or wants you dead because you're the only one who could stop it? You see, Aang being the Avatar means he has the potential to master not only one of the 4 elements known in this universe, but all of them. Growing up as an air nomad, Aang already knows airbending. In fact, he's gained complete mastery over the element at, again, 12 years old. The youngest known airbending master in history, at least for a long time. So with him already having mastery over one of the elements, each subsequent season focuses on him learning, if not mastering, every other element. Throughout the history of the Avatar, each reincarnate would learn the element in a specific order: fire, air, water, and earth, corresponding with the changing seasons. Fire for summer, air for autumn, water for winter, and earth for spring. Already being an airbending master, that would mean the next element Aang would need to focus on would be water, which, coincidentally, Katara needs to master as well, so why not kill 2 birds with 1 stone? Like I said earlier, Season 1 is basically Aang learning about the world again. Many things are completely foreign to him now, despite it being merely 100 years. Places he used to frequent are either drastically changed or completely gone, and there was a constant sense of fear and paranoia no matter where he went. This state of affairs caused by the Fire Nation is all-consuming, no pun intended. It not only affects everyone outside of the nation, but those within as well. This here is a perfect segue to discuss another pivotal character in the show. Someone whose life has been dictated by the actions of the Fire Nation. The only difference is that he, unlike many others, calls the Fire Nation home. A home he lost and is very desperate to get back to. You see, Zuko is as much an integral character to the story than even Aang is. His motivation to defeat the main trio and capture the Avatar isn't necessarily for glory. Well, maybe a little. But his true motivation is to get back home and regain that sense of normalcy he had before he was banished. A banishment sentenced to him by his own father, who left not only a metaphorical, but a physical scar to remind him of the purgatory he now lives in. Forced to complete a, at the time, impossible mission, Zuko was cast aside by the very nation he was one day destined to rule, being the Crown Prince. By the end of the first season, you really start to feel that Aang understands the gravity of the situation he's currently in. Because when you think about it, when you're watching as a viewer, you're experiencing this brand new world just like he is. Yes, it may have once been something more familiar to him, but now things have changed so much that it may as well be something completely foreign. By the end of the first season, you really get the feeling that that innocent, goofy, fun-loving kid truly understands the weight on his shoulders and the expectations he now needs to live up to. And speaking of weight on his shoulders, I think this is a good segue into part 2. Season 2, as the title dictates, focuses on the trio helping Aang find an earthbending teacher. By this point in the story, both Aang and Katara are pretty adept waterbenders, with some people arguing Katara being a waterbending master at this point. She's no longer the southern water tribe girl that was barely able to catch a fish. She's now able to hold her own in virtually any situation. To me, the first season being focused on water is quite symbolic. Water is the element of change and flow. Aang, being thrown into this foreign world, has to deal with all that has changed in his presence. He has to come to terms with the situation and adapt to everything that's being thrown at him. Earth, on the other hand, is the element of substance. Those who wish to master this element have to be unmoving, be able to take any challenge head on without flinching or wavering. Unfortunately, Aang, naturally being an air nomad, initially has problems with this. The ideology of the air nomads is taking the path of least resistance, that instead of taking anything head on, there's always a simpler, easier solution around any problem. Airbending itself is the element of freedom, to be detached from earthly desires and achieve enlightenment through spirituality. That in and of itself presents the problem. If fire and water are opposite to each other, then the opposing element to air would naturally be earth, in which Aang would have a much more difficult time learning than he did with water. But before we proceed any further, it would behoove me to introduce the newest member of our cast, the very same person who would go on to be Aang's earthbending teacher. You see, Toph is a blind girl who grew up in a wealthy family in the Earth Kingdom. Due to her disability, she was seen as delicate, fragile, and weak, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Due to certain circumstances, she was able to hone her natural affinity for earthbending to the utmost limit, in which she not only uses the ability for combat, but as an extension of her senses. Think of it as sort of an echolocation from the soles of her feet. With this, she can basically see anything that comes into contact with the ground, which basically means that not only is sneaking up on her virtually impossible, but that in combat, especially against other earthbenders, she can predict what the other person is going to do almost before they do. You see, Toph brings another dynamic to the group. Growing up, she was always sheltered by her overprotective parents because of her disability, with them not knowing everything she's capable of. When she's finally able to leave that situation, she immediately jumps at the idea and joins up with our group. She shares similarities with both Aang and Sokka in that she's quite sarcastic and finds humor in most situations, although she's also quite similar to Katara because of their gender. Despite her disability, she's arguably the most capable and versatile member of the group when she can see. She doesn't miss opportunities to laugh at her situation by pointing out that she is in fact blind. To be quite honest, Toph might be my favorite character in the entire series, and if you've seen the show, I don't think I have to explain why that is. Throughout the majority of Season 2, both Team Avatar and Team Fugitive are put in situations where they have to confront unresolved issues, current decisions, or future problems. Aang having to learn how to detach from his earthly desires to fully become in tune with his avatar state, Katara strategizing with the Earth Kingdom in order to organize attacks on the Fire Nation, Sokka seeing and meeting up with his dad for the first time in a long time, Toph reconciling with the family that she left behind, Zuko seeing firsthand the outcome of his nation's effect on the rest of the world, and finally Iroh having to let his nephew go and discover his own path. Oh, you're probably wondering who Iroh is. Well, let me enlighten you. Iroh is Zuko's uncle, and arguably the best character in the entire series when asking a majority of the fanbase. He's a wise and insightful old man and the closest thing to a father figure that Zuko has ever known. I know I haven't mentioned him much up until now, but that's not because he's not an important part of the story. Quite the opposite, in fact. He's the one person that keeps Zuko grounded and reminds him that there's more to life than what others dictate from him. The reason I'm only bringing him up now is because I think Season 2 is where Iroh shines the most. From helping kids escape trouble, to teaching a bandit how to rob better, to opening his own tea shop, to even helping our main cast in times of crises, he's a person who sees the overall big picture and knows that despite borders or nations, the world is connected and that everybody has something they can learn from or impart to others. So Season 3, in my opinion, is the culmination of everything our cast learned in the previous 2 seasons. The ability to change and adapt, and the ability to be resolute in your stance. When a person has both of these things, plus the drive to see things through, there are very few obstacles that'll prevent that person from reaching their goals. Season 3 to me symbolizes our group's conviction to finish this journey. Time is not on their side, and this war has been going on for far too long. If they want their sacrifices up until now to mean anything, they need to finish this soon. By this point, Aang has become at least adept in 3 out of the 4 elements: air, earth, and water. Now is the time for him to find a firebending teacher and fulfill his destiny as the Avatar. But the question is, who? Remember, throughout the entire journey, the enemy has been the Fire Nation. If that's the case, how could he possibly find someone to teach him firebending if that very nation is the enemy that they're fighting against? The nation that either wants him captured or dead. Well, if you think about it, there's only one real possibility. He has to find a teacher that is defected from the Fire Nation, but that in and of itself poses serious risks. If he does find a defector, who's to say that they won't turn on him and expose him to the Fire Nation for clemency? Another plausible problem will be finding somebody in the first place. Because remember, not everybody is born with the ability to bend. And even if they were, with the current state of affairs, if someone were to defect, they would most likely be in hiding for the rest of their lives or risk execution. Ironically enough, Aang actually met one of these defectors back in Season 1. He attempted to learn firebending at the time, but was far too immature and undisciplined. Due to this, he lost control and ended up burning Katara. This is due to the nature of firebending itself. Fire is the element of power. Unlike the other elements, fire tends to have a mind of its own. If you aren't disciplined enough to wield it, you risk losing control and having it consume everything in its path. Aang in Season 1 was definitely not ready to master firebending. He was far too immature and childish at the time, but through his journey and the many lessons he's had to learn in order to learn both water and earth, he's far from just the immature prankster he was back then. With all that being said, at this point, I'm sure you can think of at least a couple of people who come to mind that could teach him firebending. One, of course, is Iroh, who at this point in the story has been on the run from the very nation he once called home. Unfortunately, he had been captured in the season prior while helping our main cast escape death or imprisonment. So that only leaves one other person who could possibly fill this role. Someone who at first thought of nothing but returning to the place he once called home. Someone who, through his journey, sometimes with company, sometimes alone, saw the destruction and chaos that his people caused in their wake in their lust for power. Someone who sees the scars that this 100-year war has caused at the hands of the Fire Nation because he too has been permanently scarred by those hands. Alright, let me stop dragging this out. The person I'm talking about is of course Prince Zuko, the rightful heir to the throne and the one person who can change the future of the Fire Nation, but only if he turns against it, burns it down, and builds something better from the ashes. But there's a major problem. Over the course of the series, Zuko has done nothing but antagonize our party, hunting them down from one side of the earth to the other, and just overall being a thorn in our sides. Even if he now offered to be Aang's firebending teacher, would he accept? Would the rest of the group accept? You know, at this point in the series, Avatar had been airing for roughly 2 years. And although the time frame is much shorter, just hear me out. Could you imagine being hunted by the same person for 2 straight years, and then out of nowhere they say they want to help you take down the people that they were helping to hunt you down in the first place? It's an interesting dilemma depending on your perspective. As a viewer, we're getting insight from both ends. Of course, we're following Aang's journey and his road to end this war, but we're also following the journey of Zuko, who in a way is the yin to Aang's yang. Try saying that 5 times fast. So at the end of the day, we as viewers see the pain, conflict, indecisiveness, and overall turmoil that Zuko goes through before making this pivotal decision. But from our party's perspective, Zuko is just as much a threat now as he was the first day they met him, if not worse. Season 3 is that of conviction. There's no going back for anybody, and one way or another, things have to come to an end, be it for better or for worse. There's something about the story of Avatar: The Last Airbender that to this day hasn't really been replicated for me by any other modern media. The cohesiveness of the story and the complexity of quite literally every character, even the animals, really makes you think as though the entire show was completely planned out from start to finish. Whether or not that is the case, I don't know, but if it was, I'd 100% believe it. Despite it being a quote-unquote kids show, with people having magical powers, it just felt real. The power system in universe, despite being somewhat magical in nature, is based off real-life fighting styles. Airbending is based off a fighting style called Bagua. It utilizes a lot of circular movements and rotations in order to counteract and resist attacks. Waterbending is based off Tai Chi, in which the practitioner uses soft, flowing movements mimicking that of ocean waves. Earthbending was inspired by Hungar, a martial art that requires strong, rooted stances for power and defense. And finally, firebending was inspired by Northern Shaolin Kung Fu, a martial art that utilizes a lot of dynamic arm and leg movements. All of this is to say that despite being fictional, unlike other shows like Naruto and Dragon Ball Z, when you saw people facing off against each other in Avatar, their strikes, movements, and positioning all just made sense. The complexity of the characters, the engaging story, and the lessons it teaches you, Avatar: The Last Airbender is a one-of-a-kind experience that I'm glad I was able to be a part of. If you guys enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more similar content, and feel free to share this video to anybody you think may enjoy it as well. With all that being said, I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll catch you again in the next video. Peace.